"Don't touch that." The words came so sharply that Nora Blake froze, with one hand still inches from the curtain. Across the room, 78-year-old Thomas Reed was staring at her, as though she had been about to take something far more important than a piece of fabric. And that was when Nora noticed it, a small framed photograph, hidden behind his water cup. If stories about the quiet reasons behind people's behavior mean something to you, stay with me, because sometimes the person who seems the hardest to understand is the one who most needs someone to listen. By the time Nora began working on Thomas Reed's floor, almost everyone knew his name, not because he was friendly, not because he told wonderful stories, and certainly not because he made anyone's job easy. Thomas had earned a reputation. Room 14 is in a mood again. He refused breakfast. He told me to get out. He got angry because I moved his chair. He doesn't want help from anybody. None of the caregivers said these things cruelly. Most of them were simply tired. Thomas could turn an ordinary morning into an uncomfortable one with just a few words. If someone opened his curtains, he complained. If someone moved his coffee, he complained. If someone adjusted the blanket across his legs without warning, he pulled it away. And if two staff members stood near his bed, discussing what needed to be done, Thomas would sometimes snap. "I'm sitting right here." Eventually, people learned to keep their conversations with him short. Knock enter, finish the task, leave. Thomas seemed to prefer it that way, or at least that was what everyone assumed. He had arrived at the small rehabilitation care home after losing some of the independence he had always taken for granted. Before that, Thomas had lived quietly in the same modest house for many years. He was the kind of man who fixed his own leaking faucet, made his own coffee, chose his own breakfast, and decided for himself whether the curtains were open or closed. His wife, Evelyn, had died some time earlier. After losing her, the routines of that little house became even more important. Her cup remained in the kitchen cabinet. Her favorite chair remained beside the window, and a photograph of the two of them remained on the small table beside his chair. Thomas didn't talk much about it, but he carried that photograph with him when he left home. Now, almost every part of his day happened according to someone else's schedule. Meals arrived at certain times. People knocked on his door throughout the day. Someone reminded him when it was time for an appointment. Someone changed his sheets. Someone cleaned his table. Someone offered to help him dress. None of those things were meant to be unkind, but to Thomas, each small moment seemed to say the same thing. You are no longer in charge of your own life. And Thomas did not know how to say how frightened that made him. So instead, he became angry. Nora Blake was 43 and had been a caregiver for several years. She wasn't the loudest person on the floor. She didn't have a special trick for difficult patients, and she didn't believe that every bad mood could be fixed with a smile. Mostly, Nora paid attention. During her first few days around Thomas, she noticed something the others had missed. Thomas wasn't angry all the time. In fact, there were moments when he was perfectly calm. When Nora knocked and waited for him to answer before entering, he didn't complain. When she asked, "Would you like the curtains open?" instead of simply opening them, he answered normally. When she placed his coffee down and asked, "Is this where you want it?" Thomas simply nodded. But whenever someone made a decision for him without asking, his entire body changed. His shoulders tightened, his jaw hardened, his voice became sharp. At first, Nora thought it might be a coincidence. Then, one afternoon, she saw it happen again. Another caregiver entered, carrying fresh towels. She was in a hurry and began clearing several objects from Thomas's bedside table so she could wipe it down. A book, a pair of glasses, a water cup, then the small framed photograph. Thomas immediately sat forward. "Put that back." The caregiver stopped. "I'm just cleaning, Thomas." I said, "Put it back." "Nothing is happening to it. Put it back." His voice was loud enough that someone passing in the hallway looked inside. The caregiver returned the photograph and left a few moments later, visibly frustrated. Thomas sat silently afterward. But Nora noticed something. He wasn't looking at the doorway. He was looking at the photograph. His hand was resting on the frame, and his anger had disappeared. What remained looked much more like fear. The following morning, Nora brought Thomas his breakfast. She knocked. "Thomas." There was no answer. She waited, then knocked again. Finally, she heard him say, "Come in." Nora entered and placed the tray on the counter, rather than immediately putting it in front of him. "Where would you like this?" Thomas pointed toward the small table. There, Nora set it down. Then she saw his framed photograph sitting beside his water cup. This time, she didn't touch it. Instead, she pulled a chair a short distance away. "Can I sit for a minute?" Thomas looked suspicious. "Why? I want to ask you something." He gave a small shrug. Nora sat for several seconds. Neither of them spoke. Then she said, "Thomas, what are we doing that makes you feel like you have to fight us?" He looked at her. The question seemed to catch him completely off guard. "What? I've noticed something. You don't get angry when people ask you first." Thomas looked away. Nora continued carefully, "But when we move something, or change something, or start doing something without asking, you get upset." Silence. Nora waited. She did not fill the silence. She did not tell him he needed to cooperate. She did not remind him that everyone was trying to help. Finally, Thomas looked toward the photograph. That was Evelyn. Nora followed his eyes. "Your wife? 49 years. His voice had changed. It was quieter now. Nora looked at the photograph but didn't reach for it. "She looks happy." Thomas almost smiled. She was. Another silence. Then he said, "Yesterday, when they picked that up." He stopped. Nora waited. "I know nobody was stealing it." His fingers tightened slightly around the arm of the chair. "I know that." Then Thomas looked at her. "But everyone touches everything." Nora said nothing. "My clothes, my chair, my coffee, my curtains." He looked around the room. "People come in here and start moving things before they even tell me why." His voice was beginning to rise again, but this time Nora could hear what was underneath it: fear. "I had a house," Thomas said. "A kitchen, my own chair, keys in my pocket." He swallowed. "If I wanted coffee at 6, I made coffee at 6. If I wanted the curtains closed until noon, they stayed closed." He looked toward Evelyn's photograph. Then everything changed. Nora leaned slightly forward. Thomas continued. "Now everybody is always telling me what happens next. Breakfast, appointments, laundry showers, medication rounds, exercises, visitors, rest. Even when the people around him were trying to help, Thomas felt as though his life had become a list written by someone else. "And when I say no," he whispered, "everyone says I'm difficult." Nora felt something tighten in her chest. Thomas wasn't trying to make everyone's day miserable. He was trying to protect the few decisions that still felt like his. Nora asked one more question. "What would make this easier?" Thomas stared at her for several seconds. Then he answered, "Ask me." Nora nodded. "Ask her, before you open the curtains." "Okay, tell me what you're doing. Before you do it, I can do that." Thomas hesitated, then added, "And don't talk about me when I'm sitting right there." Nora nodded again. "That's fair." For the first time since she had met him, Thomas looked directly at her, without anger in his face. Nora stood. She pointed toward his breakfast tray. "Would you like me to bring it closer?" Thomas looked at the tray, then back at Nora. Yes, it was one small word, but it was the first time Nora had heard him accept help without sounding defeated. Nora did not suddenly become the only person Thomas trusted. And Thomas did not become cheerful overnight. That wasn't how it happened. Instead, Nora shared what she had learned with the other caregivers, not as a complaint, not as criticism, just as information that might help. Knock and wait. Explain before you do something. Give him a choice, when there's a choice to give. And please, don't move the photograph without asking. The staff began trying it. One caregiver came in the next morning. "Thomas, I need to change the bedding. Would you rather sit by the window or in the chair near the door while I do it?" Thomas looked surprised. "The window." "All right, No argument. At lunch, another staff member asked, "Would you like the tray here or beside the chair?" Beside the chair? No raised voice. Later that week, someone needed to move his table. "Thomas, I need a little more space here. Is it okay if I move this about a foot?" He looked at the table, then nodded. "Put it back afterward." "I will. Fine." The change wasn't perfect. There were still difficult mornings. There were days when Thomas was impatient. Once he snapped at a caregiver and then sat silently for several minutes before saying, "I shouldn't have said it like that. The tomorrow's another day." Within a couple of weeks, the staff began noticing small things. Thomas started saying good morning. He began eating some meals in the shared sitting room. Instead of always staying alone, he occasionally asked people questions about their day. And sometimes, when Nora entered his room, she found the photograph of Evelyn facing outward on the table. One afternoon, Thomas picked it up. He held it toward Nora. "That's us about 30 years ago." Nora leaned closer. "Where were you?" "A lake." Thomas smiled. Evelyn hated that boat. Nora laughed. Thomas laughed too. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No music played. Nobody standing in the hallway applauded. It was just an older man telling a story about someone he had loved. But it was the kind of story nobody had heard while they were busy trying not to make him angry. A few days later, Nora was leaving his room when Thomas called after her. "Nora," she turned. "Yes." He hesitated. "Thank you." "For what?" Thomas looked toward the photograph. For asking, nodded. Then she left him, with the curtains open exactly halfway, just the way he had requested. Sometimes, anger is not a person's whole personality. Sometimes, it is the last small fence they have built around their dignity, their grief, or the feeling that their life still belongs to them. Thomas didn't need someone to win an argument with him. He needed someone to ask what he was trying to protect. If this story stayed with you, comment. Kindness lives here. And if you've ever known someone whose difficult behavior made more sense once you understood what they were carrying, share that memory too. You never know who might read your words and decide to listen a little longer next time.